When I first met Madison, my husband Ethan's younger sister, I honestly thought she was lovely. I'm Emma, and I've been married to Ethan for nearly 7 years now. For the most part, our marriage has been amazing, except for the constant storm that is Madison. Over time, my feelings toward her changed completely. Madison has proved herself to be manipulative, toxic, and endlessly negative. It seemed like she simply couldn't stand me being in Ethan's life, no matter how hard I tried to keep things civil. Ethan and Madison grew up close. Even as teenagers, Madison loved meddling in Ethan's relationships. At 17, Ethan dated Madison's best friend, only to break up because he felt pressured by Madison's expectations. Years later, at 23, when Ethan was single, Madison started pushing another one of her friends at him. Ethan refused, which sent Madison running to their parents in tears, insisting that she should have a say in who her brother dated. Thankfully, Catherine and Richard, my in-laws, didn't entertain Madison's dramatics and supported Ethan making his own choices. When Ethan and I first started dating, Madison was cold but polite. But as things became serious, she ramped up the tension. She'd casually drop mentions of Ethan's ex-girlfriends whenever I was around, going on about how great they were doing, or suggesting Ethan should reconnect with them. Ethan was baffled by her behavior and repeatedly told her to stop, but she'd retaliate by accusing me of jealousy, claiming Ethan deserved someone better than me. It didn't stop there. Madison would sometimes deliberately invite Ethan's exes to family dinners, pretending she just happened to bump into them and had to be polite. She stalked my public Instagram account obsessively, often being the first to watch my stories. If any guy left a comment on my photos, she'd rush to Ethan to complain that I was posting inappropriate pictures online. Fortunately, Ethan and I mostly found her accusations ridiculous and would often laugh them off in private. But what really hurt me was that I'd always tried to be friendly toward Madison, and yet she actively tried to break Ethan and me up. When Ethan and I decided to move in together, Madison told him that I had too many flaws and that she could find him someone way better. Her words cut me deeply, marking the beginning of years of conflict that would follow us into our marriage and beyond. Things escalated dramatically when Ethan proposed to me. Our engagement should have been one of the happiest moments of our lives, and for a while, it truly was. Ethan's parents, Catherine and Richard, were thrilled for us and completely supportive. But Madison, of course, found a way to make it all about her. The night we announced our engagement to the family, everyone was cheering and congratulating us, except Madison. She sat quietly, staring off into the distance. Then, suddenly, she pushed back her chair and stormed out of the room. Later that night, she called Ethan in tears, screaming that she deserved to be the first to know about our engagement because she was supposedly the closest woman in his life. A few days later, she sent me a borderline threatening message, warning me how I should treat Ethan because she had always been the only woman who mattered to him. The message was so unsettling that I nearly shivered reading it. I left it on read, refusing to dignify her drama with a response. From that point on, Madison's treatment of me grew even icier. Despite the tension, she insisted on involving herself in every aspect of our wedding planning. She'd show up to dress fittings and my bridal shower, only to criticize every choice I made. Whether it was the flowers, the color scheme, or the centerpieces, nothing escaped her contempt. One afternoon, she overheard me discussing the centerpieces with Catherine and immediately started mocking my taste, claiming it was classless and exactly why she wanted her brother to marry someone better. That was my breaking point. I finally snapped and told Madison she was no longer invited to our wedding. I shouted that I couldn't tolerate her constant insults and negativity any longer. She stared at me in shock, gasping as if she'd never imagined I'd dare stand up to her. Even Catherine and Richard backed me, telling Madison she needed to respect our boundaries. Predictably, Madison ran crying to Ethan, demanding he control me because I'd embarrassed her. Ethan, to his credit, told her firmly that he supported my decision and she wouldn't be welcome at the wedding unless she apologized sincerely. Madison did send me an apology over text, but by then, I was exhausted and refused to reply. I just wanted to focus on marrying Ethan, not dealing with her theatrics. Eventually, Madison was allowed to come to the wedding. I thought it would be the mature thing to do, hoping she'd behave for once. But on our wedding day, while every guest respected our chosen pink and pastel dress code, Madison arrived in a floor-length black gown with a matching veil, looking like she was heading to a funeral instead of a celebration. She went around telling guests how she felt she was losing her brother to another woman, playing the victim and causing a spectacle. Ethan confronted her during the reception, but Madison claimed she had the right to wear whatever she wanted and accused me of being controlling. Her drama finally pushed Catherine and Richard to demand she leave the wedding altogether. It was humiliating and deeply painful, but even then, I didn't fully realize just how far Madison would eventually go. After the chaos at our wedding, I did my best to keep my distance from Madison. The emotional scars from her constant jabs and that humiliating stunt with her funeral dress were still raw. I had absolutely no intention of letting her anywhere near my future children, and when our son Liam was born, I firmly told Ethan that I didn't want Madison involved. Ethan agreed, and so did Catherine and Richard, who fully understood why I wanted to protect my family. But then, life threw Madison a devastating curveball. 2 years after our wedding, she suffered a miscarriage while dating her then-boyfriend, Ryan. It was heartbreaking, even for me. Despite all our past conflicts, I couldn't help but feel sorry for her. Madison seemed genuinely shattered by the loss. Seeing her so vulnerable made Ethan and me soften a bit. We decided to extend an olive branch, hoping maybe this tragedy had changed her for the better. At first, it looked like she had. Madison began spending more time with us and was surprisingly sweet to Liam. She'd bring him little toys, laugh with him, and seemed genuinely affectionate. For a while, I dared to believe that perhaps she had finally grown up and let go of her toxic behavior. But it didn't last. Slowly but surely, Madison slipped right back into her old patterns. She'd start conversations innocently enough, then turn them into sob stories about how hard her life was, how everyone wronged her, and how nothing ever seemed to work out for her. She'd complain endlessly about ex-friends, ex-managers, or ex-boyfriends, always portraying herself as the victim and never admitting any fault in any situation. Worse, she tried to wedge herself into my life again. She began probing into my daily routines, asking invasive questions about why I went to the gym every morning, why I carried a change of clothes, or why I needed time for myself. Initially, I brushed it off and explained that I simply wanted to stay healthy and avoid going to work all sweaty. Madison would just nod, sometimes licking her lips in this weird way, like she was mentally filing away every detail. One particularly awkward family lunch cemented my realization that Madison was spiraling back to her old ways. Catherine had been talking about a friend who divorced her husband and took half his assets after discovering his affair. Out of nowhere, Madison interrupted, looking directly at Ethan and asking if we'd signed a prenup. The question hung in the air like a bad smell. Ethan told her plainly that we hadn't, explaining that we both made good money and trusted each other completely. Madison snorted and implied that I might blindside Ethan someday because cheating happens all the time. Her accusations left me speechless and furious. I demanded she explain herself, and Madison went so far as to suggest I must be seeing someone else because I always carried extra clothes. She insisted it was her duty as a sister to warn Ethan. It was one of the most hurtful moments of my life, and it felt like all the progress we'd made after Liam's birth was nothing but an illusion. At that point, Catherine and Richard stepped in to tell Madison she was crossing the line and that she needed to stop meddling in our marriage. But Madison just doubled down, pushing boundaries further than ever before. After Madison's explosive accusations about me possibly cheating, things between us reached a level I'd never imagined. I felt humiliated and violated, knowing she'd twisted my innocent routines into something sordid. But Madison wasn't finished yet. A few weeks after that disastrous lunch, we were gathered again at Catherine and Richard's house for a family meal. Everything seemed relatively normal until Madison, as usual, steered the conversation into dangerous territory. She stared right at Ethan and, with a smirk, blurted out that he ought to consider a paternity test for Liam because, according to her, Liam didn't really look like him. For a moment, the entire table fell completely silent. I felt like the ground was dropping away beneath me. Catherine dropped her fork. Richard stared in shock. Madison, meanwhile, sat there smugly, as if she'd just dropped some vital piece of truth the rest of us were too blind to see. But Ethan's reaction was like nothing I'd ever witnessed from him before. He turned red with rage, his jaw clenching so hard I thought he might crack a tooth. Looking his sister dead in the eye, he hissed that she had no right to talk about our son, and that she wasn't even a mother yet. And, in his words, someone like her didn't deserve to be one. Madison's eyes went wide, and for the first time in a long time, she seemed completely stunned. She stammered, trying to laugh it off, but Ethan cut her off coldly. He told her she was a miserable, bitter person who spent her days projecting her failures onto other people because she had nothing meaningful in her own life. He told her she was obsessed with destroying our marriage because it reminded her of everything she couldn't have. Reduced to tears, Madison started wailing and turned to Ryan, who was sitting beside her, for comfort. But Ryan didn't say a single word in her defense. He simply stared down at his plate, looking defeated. Ethan, meanwhile, kept ranting, his voice shaking as he listed off all the ways Madison had tried to sabotage our relationship for years. He even accused her of trying to ruin our wedding, and of being jealous that I'd replaced her as the woman closest to him. Eventually, Catherine stepped in and gently pulled Ethan aside, trying to calm him down. I reached for his hand under the table, my own heart pounding in my chest. Even Richard, who rarely lost his composure, looked rattled. Madison disappeared into the bathroom, sobbing uncontrollably. When she finally returned, Ethan refused to even look at her. He apologized to Ryan for the scene, but ignored Madison entirely. That day marked the end of any attempt at pretending we could be a normal family with her. Ethan told me later that Madison's words about Liam had crossed an unforgivable line. Not only had she tried to sabotage our marriage, now she was going after our child. From that moment on, Ethan and I agreed that Madison would no longer be welcome in our lives. We couldn't keep letting her poison our family. Catherine and Richard supported us wholeheartedly, realizing that Madison's actions were hurting Ethan as deeply as they were hurting me. It felt both terrifying and freeing to finally draw that boundary. For nearly a year after that explosive family lunch, Ethan and I had no contact whatsoever with Madison. Life felt peaceful and so much lighter without her chaos hanging over us. We focused on raising Liam, working on our careers, and simply enjoying being a family. Then, 2 months ago, I discovered I was pregnant again. It was completely unexpected, as we hadn't been actively trying, but Ethan and I were overjoyed. We decided to share our news at Ethan's upcoming birthday party, wanting it to be a surprise announcement surrounded by family and friends. Catherine and Richard planned a beautiful backyard celebration, inviting close relatives and friends. Everything was going smoothly. Laughter filled the air, and Ethan seemed genuinely touched by the love from everyone. But then, to my utter shock, Madison showed up. Neither Ethan nor I had invited her. Apparently, she'd heard about the party through mutual friends and decided to come. She rushed to hug Ethan, crying about how much she'd missed him and how sorry she was for everything that had happened. Ethan, trying to keep the peace, told her she needed to apologize to me directly if she truly wanted a fresh start. Madison nodded, turned to me, and mumbled an apology, saying she'd been attending therapy and realized how wrong she'd been. I didn't believe a word of it, but in front of all those people, I simply nodded and kept it polite. Catherine and Richard discreetly checked with us if we wanted her kicked out, but Ethan insisted we shouldn't cause a scene. Part of me hoped maybe therapy really had changed Madison. The party continued, and when Ethan gave a speech thanking everyone, he spoke so lovingly about me that I blushed like the girl who'd first fallen in love with him years ago. Finally, we announced our pregnancy. The crowd erupted in cheers, hugs, and happy tears. My mother sobbed with joy, Richard wiped his eyes, and people crowded around us asking baby name questions. Through it all, I noticed Madison standing stiffly, her smile frozen and eyes slightly glazed over. She looked off. I brushed it aside, thinking maybe she was just surprised or processing the news. Later, as I sat waiting for Ethan to bring me a plate of food, Madison approached me with an enormous grin. She insisted she wanted to personally serve me lunch to make up for all the terrible things she'd done. She handed me a plate, still smiling brightly. I thanked her, trying to be gracious, though a little uneasy. When I glanced down at the plate, my heart nearly stopped. Nestled among the pasta and veggies were several pieces of shrimp. I'm highly allergic to shrimp. Madison knew this well. Shocked and a little shaky, I quietly set the plate aside and got up to get my own meal. At that moment, Ryan came over to congratulate me on the pregnancy. He noticed I wasn't eating and, after I explained the shrimp issue, offered to take my plate and eat it himself so it wouldn't go to waste. I hesitated, but eventually let him have it, thinking it was harmless. Minutes later, the party exploded into chaos. The atmosphere at the birthday party shifted in an instant. One moment, everyone was chatting and laughing, and the next, Ryan was clutching his throat, gagging and gasping for air. His face turned an alarming shade of red, and he staggered away from the table, eyes wide with panic. Within seconds, he collapsed to his knees and began vomiting violently. Guests screamed, dropping their plates. Ethan and Madison rushed toward Ryan as Catherine yelled for someone to call an ambulance. I stood frozen, my mind spinning. I kept thinking, that plate was meant for me. Ryan managed to point shakily toward the plate he'd just eaten from, then at his throat, before he passed out entirely. Madison fell to her knees beside him, sobbing hysterically, demanding to know what had happened. But when she turned to me, her eyes weren't just panicked, they were accusing. She cried out, asking if I'd given Ryan my food. My voice shook as I admitted that yes, Ryan had taken my plate because it had shrimp on it, and he offered to eat it so it wouldn't go to waste. Madison's face twisted into a look of disbelief, and she started wailing even louder, drawing everyone's attention. The paramedics arrived quickly and loaded Ryan into an ambulance while party guests stood around in shock. Ethan kept asking me what had happened, and I tried to explain through my tears that Madison had brought me the plate with shrimp. Catherine and Richard were horrified. The police showed up shortly afterward, wanting statements from everyone. I felt sick to my stomach as I realized how close I'd come to possibly being poisoned, along with my unborn baby. Ethan and I spent the entire night unable to sleep, going over every detail. In the days that followed, Madison kept calling Ethan and me, crying and insisting she didn't mean any harm. She claimed she'd only wanted to make peace with me, and that the shrimp was an innocent mistake. But deep down, I didn't believe her for a second. Catherine and Richard stayed at our house because they were too shaken to return to their own. Meanwhile, Ryan remained in the hospital, recovering slowly. Ethan and I were fielding frantic calls from relatives wanting to know what on earth had happened. Finally, I couldn't carry the weight of my suspicions anymore. I sat Ethan, Catherine, and Richard down one night over dinner and confessed everything. How Madison had insisted on bringing me that plate, how she'd smiled so sweetly while handing it to me, and how it felt deliberate, given she knew about my severe shellfish allergy. Catherine, practical as always, suggested we check the security cameras installed around their backyard. Ethan pulled up the footage on Richard's phone, and there it was, clear as day. Madison preparing the plate, glancing around nervously, and carrying it straight to me. There was no longer any doubt. Madison had deliberately tried to harm me. As the weight of that realization settled in, Ethan sat trembling with fury. Catherine and Richard stared at the video in horror, unable to comprehend how their own daughter could go this far. We knew there was only one thing left to do: take the footage to the police. After watching the security footage, none of us could deny the truth anymore. Madison hadn't just been a meddlesome sister-in-law. She had tried to poison me. The shock and grief on Catherine and Richard's faces broke my heart. Ethan was livid, pacing the kitchen while clenching and unclenching his fists. The next day, Catherine and Richard went to the police with the video evidence. When confronted, Madison confessed almost immediately. She broke down sobbing, admitting that she'd mixed a small amount of rat poison into the shrimp dish. She claimed she only wanted me to end up in the hospital and learn a lesson, insisting she never meant to actually kill me or harm the baby. Her confession left us all speechless. Madison tried to spin it, telling the police she'd been hurt and jealous because Ethan and I announced our pregnancy at his birthday party, the same event where she'd secretly planned to announce her own pregnancy with Ryan. She said she felt like I'd stolen her spotlight again, just as I supposedly stole her brother's love years ago. Her words made me feel sick. It wasn't my fault she'd chosen to make every moment about herself. Ryan was devastated when he found out. Ethan went to visit him in the hospital, offering support and assuring him he was still family no matter what he decided to do. Ryan was quiet for a long time, then finally decided he couldn't forgive Madison. Once he recovered enough to leave the hospital, he filed for divorce and pressed criminal charges against her. Madison, meanwhile, tried desperately to sway Catherine and Richard. She called them from jail, begging for forgiveness and asking them to bail her out. She even tried to manipulate them emotionally, reminding them she was pregnant and pleading that they think of their future grandchild. But Richard was firm. He told her that for too long, they'd enabled her toxic behavior, and it was time she faced the consequences of her actions. Catherine was devastated but agreed. She wept for her daughter but knew that Madison's actions couldn't simply be brushed aside anymore. She said she couldn't understand how the same little girl she'd once rocked to sleep could try to poison her own sister-in-law. It was a grief no mother should have to carry. The police gathered further evidence from the party, confirming the presence of rat poison in the food Ryan had eaten. Madison was charged with multiple crimes: reckless endangerment, attempted poisoning, and food tampering resulting in bodily harm. The case moved swiftly because the video evidence was so conclusive and her confession so explicit. Madison continued to call Ethan and me from jail, leaving voicemails sobbing about how her life was over and how she never wanted to harm anyone. But I couldn't bring myself to answer. I was pregnant, exhausted, and terrified of what she might try next if given the chance. Though my heart ached for the pain it caused Catherine and Richard, Ethan and I knew one thing for certain: Madison could never be allowed back into our lives. Not after this. 8 months have passed since Madison was arrested, and though the storm has settled, traces of it still linger in our lives. Madison ultimately pled guilty in court. She confessed everything, including how, for years, she'd been consumed with jealousy toward me. She admitted she'd always fantasized about one of her best friends marrying Ethan so their family would stay pure, and how she felt betrayed when Ethan chose me instead. During her testimony, Madison revealed that on Ethan's birthday, she'd planned to announce her own pregnancy. When Ethan and I shared our news first, she said she felt robbed of her moment, her hormones sending her into a spiral of rage. In that state, she decided to poison my meal. Her explanation was chilling. She said she never intended to physically harm me or the baby, just wanted me hospitalized so I'd know my place. She argued for a reduced sentence, insisting she never expected Ryan to eat the plate meant for me. The judge wasn't swayed. Madison was sentenced to prison, facing several years behind bars for attempted poisoning and reckless endangerment. I never attended her court hearings. The pain and betrayal cut too deep, and I wanted to protect my unborn child from any additional stress. Ryan, meanwhile, finalized his divorce from Madison. He's been incredibly gracious toward Ethan and me, even though he was the one who suffered physically. Ethan and I have made sure Ryan knows he's still family. We've invited him to holidays, birthdays, and small gatherings, and he's slowly finding his footing again. I still cry when I think about how he almost died because of me unknowingly handing him that poisoned plate. But Ryan has assured me repeatedly that he doesn't blame me, that Madison alone is responsible for her choices. Amid all this chaos, Ethan and I welcomed our baby girl, Grace. Her arrival has been like a light piercing through the shadows left behind by Madison's actions. Liam adores his baby sister, showering her with affection and proudly calling himself her big protector. Watching our children together has brought Ethan and me a sense of peace we didn't think we'd find so soon. Of course, not everything is perfect. I'm still haunted by what Madison did. I've developed a deep anxiety about eating food I haven't prepared myself. My parents and even Ethan gently encourage me to seek therapy, worried about how this trauma might affect my mental health during early motherhood. I'm considering it because I know I can't live in fear forever. Catherine and Richard remain supportive, though Catherine grieves for the daughter she's essentially lost. She confessed to me that sometimes she still wakes up hoping this was all just a nightmare. Richard, though heartbroken, stands firm in his conviction that Madison needs to serve her sentence and learn from her actions. Despite everything, Ethan and I feel incredibly grateful for the family we've built. We're closer than ever, bonded not only by love but by the trials we've survived together. And while the scars of Madison's betrayal may never fully fade, I know our family is stronger than the darkness she tried to bring into our lives. Life is moving forward, and for the first time in a long while, it finally feels safe to hope again.